Hello and welcome to World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, the Israeli government has withdrawn metal detectors from the Temple Mount site after clashes between the Palestinian protesters and security forces. Can Israelis and Palestinians ever cooperate on this religious site? The parents of a terminally ill British baby have ended their legal challenge to fly him to the U.S. for experimental treatment. So who should decide the fate of a terminally ill child? The parents or the hospital or the courts? And we begin in Israel, where they're being forced to remove security metal detectors from the holy site of the Temple Mount. Of course, for the Muslims, it's another name of that holy site. The installation of these detectors have already sparked a wave of anger among Muslims in Palestine and also elsewhere in the Middle East. Regional governments have called on Israel to defuse the situation that heightened the already tense security situation over there. Two religions have claimed the custody of this site for the past 70 years. So what does the future hold for this specific place?
The Israeli government finally pulled out metal detectors from the holy site on the Temple Mount due to violence. The Israeli measure of restricting access to Palestinian worshippers under the age of 50 to the holy site was also a source of anger.
I would like to say that if the situation does not go back to what it was on the 14th of July, then there will be no change in our position. All the new measures taken by Israel on the ground since that date should be removed, and then things will go back to normal in Jerusalem. After that, we can continue bilateral relations with the Israelis.
The fragile situation nearly soured diplomatic relations between Israel and Jordan after a Jordanian protester was shot dead by an Israeli embassy security guard. A week of simmering tensions reached a boiling point when Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas announced the freezing of contacts with Israel on all levels. Israel continues to perceive this criticism as biased.
They just claimed that Israel seeks to change the status quo on the Temple Mount, and that is what prompted the violence. Mr. President, nothing could be further from the truth. Israel's top priority is to maintain the safety and security of all Temple Mount worshippers and visitors. The Palestinians' top priority is to ignite violence.
Jerusalem's Temple Mount contains the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the third holiest site for Palestinian Muslims. The installation of metal detectors for Muslim pilgrims was seen as a move to outmaneuver the other for control of the Temple Mount, known as the noble sanctuary for Muslims. Jews, Christians, and Muslims have been wrestling each other for control of this site for over 1,000 years. And this competition is at the core of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that does not seem to be diffusing anytime soon.
So how is the intention, or rather intense situation there, be diffused? Is there a way by whom? We have with us three panelists in Beijing. Ms. He Wenping, professor at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Joining us in Ramallah, in Palestine, Mustafa Barghouti, the Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative, and also a member of the Palestinian Parliament. Welcome, sir. In Jerusalem, Israel, we invited Mr. Marcus Sheff, who is the CEO of Impact, Jerusalem-based research institute. Gentlemen, welcome to both of you from the Palestine and also from Israel. I want to begin with you, Mr. Barghouti. If you could be brief in your answer, it would be very much appreciated. So, from the Palestinian perspective, what's next?
What's next is what we asked for, that Israel should remove all the changes they have made in Al-Haram al-Sharif. Mr. Netanyahu has been playing games. He's removing the metal detectors, but he wants to impose cameras. He wants to impose individual search of every person who comes to pray. And he still keeps 8 gates out of 10 of the Haram Sharif closed. So practically all these measures are prohibiting freedom of prayer and freedom of access. The fact that he removed the metal detectors is another proof that these measures were not for security reasons. They are political actions to impose Israeli authority over Al-Haram al-Sharif, which is a site for Muslim prayer.
All right, let's go to Mr. Chef. You probably want to respond to your Palestinian counterpart. And also help us to understand, any further steps can Israel take?
Well, actually, I would rather not respond, but state what I think is the obvious for everyone in the region, which is that the first thing we need to do is to calm the situation down. And I think all moderate parties in the region here and those countries that neighbor Israel and the Palestinian Authority know that and should be involved in that. Let's recall, of course, how this started. There was a terror attack on the Temple Mount, on the Haram al-Sharif. 2 policemen were killed. So, of course, security measures were necessary. Now, questions can be asked about the way Israel reacted to this tactically, although it is fair to say that, you know, any country would need to make sure that there were security measures. But at the end of the day, the problem here is the constant stream of incitement that Palestinians get about what is going on the Haram al-Sharif. Ultimately, for 50 years, there has been a status quo. For 50 years, Christians, Muslims and Jews have practiced their religion freely. The Jordanian Waqf controls the Haram al-Sharif. Jews are not allowed to pray there. And so there is, of course, freedom of religion there for everybody. People need to make sure that calm is restored, and moderate forces need to be involved in that right now.
When you talk about the terrorist attack, in fact, in the international press, it's rather a story about 3 Arab Israelis that have been in clash with the Israeli soldiers over there, or security forces over there. 3 died, and also 2 security soldiers also died as well. That is what is being covered when it comes to international press.
Exactly.
Of course,
they brought weapons.
When you talk about the history,
they brought weapons to this holy site.
When you talk about the history of this place, this has been quite a controversy throughout the decades, known to Muslims as the Noble Sanctuary and to the Jews as the Temple Mount. The site has been an enlightening rod for rival religions. It has triggered major confrontations in the past decades. For example, 1929, deadly riots broke out during the British Mandate. 1996, an Israeli decision to open a new entrance to the west of the plaza sparked also clashes that left more than 80 people dead in 3 days. On Friday, 3 Arab Israelis, as we mentioned earlier, opened fire at Israeli police near the site, killing 2 of them before they were also shot dead by security forces. So there are a lot of tragedies happening over there. And also we know recently there are several others injured as well. On July the 14th, several hundred injured rather, and several dead as well. So Mr. Barghouti, here's the thing. What can the Palestinians do when the metal detector have been removed?
Well, first, we want, it's very simple. We want all the doors to the mosque to be opened immediately. We want them to remove these cameras that are not necessary. And we want Mr. Netanyahu to retreat from his demand that every person who comes to the mosque should be searched, because if you do that, people will not be able to enter. There will be thousands and thousands of people on Friday, and it's an impossible action.
Okay.
But more than that, I want to say that we want the freedom of access to Jerusalem. Let me tell you that 95% of the Palestinians in West Bank and Gaza, including myself, are officially prohibited from entering Jerusalem.
Okay, I'm gonna ask Mr. Chef. I'm gonna ask Mr. Chef about that later. But I have to ask you, Mr. Barghouti, as well. We need to be fair in this discussion. What about the access for the Jews to come into the Al-Aqsa Mosque, to the Jews also known as the Temple Mount, for them to practice their religion? Do you think that is possible for the Palestinians or for the Muslims?
We should speak about equality here. Jewish people have the Wailing Wall or the Western Wall to which they go and pray. We go to the Aqsa Mosque, to Haram al-Sharif, and pray. They would not let me go to the Wailing Wall. They would not let me stand there and move around there. They would not let any Muslim go there. But they are entering the Al-Haram al-Sharif as tourists all the time. And they insist on coming, but they want to change the nature of the situation there, which could, of course, create very big problem.
Okay.
During the last 10 days, the Israeli army has injured 1,100 Palestinians and killed 5 Palestinians during peaceful protests.
All right.
This is also unacceptable. This is violence. And if we talk about incitement, one Israeli minister has called for ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. Ethnic cleansing. He said, repeat the Nakba. Is that acceptable? This is spoiling the situation.
Let's go to Mr. Chef for the, whether you want to respond or not, but certainly there are questions for you. First of all, 95 of the Palestinians, as Mr. Barghouti explained, that do not have freedom of movement inside the Jerusalem. Secondly, you have ministers talking specifically sensitive phrases that is likely to create more tensions. Thirdly, Israeli soldiers going there trying to change the status quo. Respond, please.
Well, the status quo is not being changed. And I think this is the most important point, and we really need to understand this, because the incitement around the change in the status quo is costing lives. People are being killed because in Palestinian textbooks, on Palestinian media, parties like Mr. Barghouti's, the Fatah party, and Hamas are claiming that there are these changes being made, calling for days of rage.
I'm not Fatah,
and of course, if you call for days of rage, then people, my apologies. Then if you call for days of rage, then people are going to go out there in the streets, and there is going to be rage, and this is the incitement that I'm talking about. So when moderate parties in the region, as far as the Israeli government is concerned, my understanding is there is no change in the status quo.
Okay.
The Palestinians need to communicate this in every single way they can to the Palestinian people. The Jordanians and the Egyptians and the Saudis are good parties to make sure that this calms down, and they are involved in that. Even the Americans are involved. But nothing will change, nothing will help until the Palestinians stop inciting.
We have both sides already voiced their opinions. Our audience all over the world, they are intelligent people. They are going to have their own judgment after both of you have made your argument. Now let's go to Ms. He here in Beijing. What I want to ask you is not to be the judge of this very controversial issue, but rather to help us understand the background of this, Ms. He. We understand this happened recently after earlier tensions, but only decades ago. So what made this thing spoil out of control at this point? We saw that happened after President Trump tried to have some kinds of discussion with the Israeli Prime Minister. We also see that happen with the bigger context of the division of the Middle East. Some countries, for example, Qatar vis-a-vis Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and some of the other issues. So how do you understand, under what circumstances, why is this thing after decades once again broke out?
I think because it's highly relates with this status of this holy city, Jerusalem. We know before, when the President Trump made some his political campaign, he even said once he get into the White House, he probably will change, like move the U.S. embassy all the way from Tel Aviv and to Jerusalem. So this is a very strong statement, because the status of Jerusalem has been both regarded as the holy city and as the capital city, both for the two states, like especially Palestine state. So if you move the U.S. embassy all the way to there, so that implies
that
very
has not
clear.
Been done yet, even though there were rhetorics
Yes, but this is a signal has been sent out, and also now it's being a very strong, closer relations between U.S. and Israel right now. So maybe this gives Israel a little, some kind of this confidence.
Impetus.
Impotence and confidence now to make a further move. This is my analysis. Another thing is, when we look about the Middle East situation right now, the anti-IS, the Daesh or ISIL, so has been now achieved some point of victory because the Mosul, the city of Mosul has been taken away, and then people are also talking about we'll crash them very soon, even in Syria. So when those common enemy issue now has becoming disappeared or pushing to the marginal places, and then the old problem now coming up again, emerge as another focus. So because the Palestine-Israel conflict has been long serving as the root causes for all those the issues in the Middle East.
So let me go to you, Mr. Barghouti. You know, we understand at the United Nations Security Council meeting, the U.S. permanent representative there, Ms. Haley, has certainly talking about the United States would do everything it can, quote, in order to calm down the situation over there about the controversy over the holy site. You also heard Jordanians, they are trying to play a role because they're the guardians of the site itself. Do you think the international community's efforts, at least from these very two different countries, different perspectives, going to be able to help your two countries, two states, Palestinians and Israelis, be able to handle it, at least for now? Mr. Barghouti.
Yes, of course, the international community has a responsibility and can do a lot. Especially if everybody considers that the issue of Jerusalem is only a sign of the main problem. And the main problem has been the ongoing Israeli occupation of Palestinian land for 50 years. The failure of the international community in dealing with that issue and the failure of the international community of guaranteeing a two-state solution is the problem that we face today. The United States, unfortunately, cannot alone play that role because the United States is very biased to Israel. It's completely biased to Israel. And that's why the American envoys are finding great difficulty solving the issue. On the other hand, in Jordan now, there is almost an uprising among the Jordanian public because of the behavior of one Israeli guard in the Israeli embassy who killed two people in Jordan and injured a third one. He killed even the man, the owner of the house in which the Israeli embassy is. And to add insult to injury, Mr. Netanyahu congratulated that guard. This arrogance, this behavior of an occupier, this behavior of a colonialist is the main obstacle. We want peace. We want to live together. We want to have normal relationship. But we cannot have normal relationship as long as Israel is occupying us and oppressing us day after day and night after night.
All right, Mr. Chef, I want you to respond to that as well. First of all, the most important issue is the two states. Of course, the international community support that. And there seems to be many Israelis as well, Palestinians, of course, support that too. But the internal politics inside going on in Israel, how much of it is moving toward ever more extreme and hardline policy toward the Palestinians and about the issue? Do you think there has been some kind of heightened excitement, at least among the Israeli leadership right now, the administration, to take some of the more than earlier possible actions to make sure there could be possibility that it would have an upper hand on certain issue? Is that going to be dangerous, do you think, Mr. Chef, for Israel?
No, in no sense. You know, in the last several years, there's actually been less building in Israeli settlements than before. You know, there is always in the situation, there is, you know, these narratives which seem to take control, which bear no relevance to the facts. Don't be absolutely clear that the Palestinians want this two-state solution. According to the latest polls, a majority of Israelis do, a minority of Palestinians do. And I think, you know, herein lies the problem. We need to see from the Palestinians an absolute acceptance of what a two-state solution means. That it means Israel and Palestine living side by side. There is an idea in Palestinian society of what the contours of this looks like, that it is a peace which is everlasting. It's not a temporary thing until there is one state, Palestine. If you look at Palestinian textbooks, there is no idea there, no understanding there of what a two-state solution looks like. There's no real discussion of the Oslo process. So there is an absolute lack of education among the Palestinian public of this two-state solution. The Israeli population, has gone for whatever peace process has been offered to them. Israel made peace with Egypt, made peace with Jordan, went to Camp David in 2000, Olmert negotiated in 2008. Israelis will always come round to the acceptance of a negotiated two-state solution, but unfortunately within Israeli society, not politicians, society, there is more and more uncertainty about whether the Palestinians themselves actually want this thing.
All right, but Mr. Shab, you still haven't answered my question. If you can, very briefly, please, is this so-called preemptive kinds of actions coming from the Israeli side, for example, about this holy site, which usually it is the Palestinians and the Muslims go there to pray, is that going to, in a way, eventually hurt Israel because it is trying to, at least in this case, change the status quo? Very briefly from you.
Again, there is no change in the status quo on the Temple Mount. This is the most sensitive place in the world. The Israeli government isn't stupid enough to, continue to take a tactical security act when it's clearly not working and when it's clearly creating problems.
All right.
There is no change in the status quo. Nobody's perfect. The Israeli government certainly isn't perfect, but on this particular occasion, there is too much misinformation.
All right. You both argued about misinformation. Let's go to Ms. He for the final words as well. Ms. He, where to go from here? Tensions we see in the Middle East.
But I didn't
all the
say
spots
my,
are
opinion,
spoiling
madam.
right now. So what can we do at this point?
I think at least this gate issue, I think should be resolved because this has generated a new round of tension. So first of all, I think maybe it's a better and the wise way for the Israeli government to remove that gate.
They already.
Yeah, they have already.
Detector already
installed
removed.
another
What's
thing.
next?
They installed another thing, another kind of thing to replace that gate. So that still the problem still there because we also need to respect the feelings of those prayers coming from Palestinian side because those people they gathered there, they sit outside of this mosque to pray to show this is the anger. So it cannot be tolerated like search one by one to get in. So this is the causes, and then we'll resolve that. But in the long run, of course, the status of Jerusalem and also the resettlement issue that's still becoming the two biggest hurdles for the peace building between Palestine and Israel.
One controversy about one holy site would become such a crisis that the international community have to pay attention to. That really help us to understand the urgency of the crisis over there between Israelis and Palestinians. But for now, I want to thank all of you, the three of you, for helping us to understand insights from your perspective. He Wenping, Mustafa Barghouti, and Marcus Sheff. Really appreciate it. Thank you. The parents of a terminally ill British baby have ended their legal challenge to fly him to the U.S. for experimental treatment. In the later half of our program, we're going to examine should hospitals stop prolonging a terminally ill patient's life when there is no hope of recovery. You're watching World Inside with Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN, Monday to Friday, every day. In the UK, the parents of terminally ill baby Charlie Gard have ended their legal challenge to take him to the U.S. for experimental treatment. The 11-month-old was born with a rare genetic condition and brain damage that has robbed him of ability to move, eat, or even breathe on his own. The legal battle began 5 months ago when the hospital decided to remove life support, but the parents wished for further treatment. This week, the family's lawyer announced their decision to end the court challenge as time has run out and their worst nightmare had been confirmed.
It was a moment of deep emotion as Charlie's parents stepped out of the High Court to talk of their heartbreaking decision. They were, in their words, preparing to let their sweet little boy slip away.
To Charlie, we say, Mummy and Daddy, we love you so much. We always have and we always will, and we are so sorry that we couldn't save you. Sweet dreams, baby. Sleep tight, our beautiful little boy. We love you.
Supporters cried when they heard of the decision by Charlie's parents, but amid the sadness, anger at what Chris Gard described as lost time.
And our poor boy has been left to just lie in hospital for months without any treatment whilst lengthy court battles have been fought. Tragically, having had Charlie's medical notes reviewed by independent experts, we now know, had Charlie been given the treatment sooner, he would have had the potential to be a normal, healthy little boy.
That's a claim doctors deny. Great Ormond Street Hospital said it reached out worldwide for help with Charlie's rare genetic condition, but to no avail. The baby could neither breathe or swallow unaided. He was paralysed and brain damaged. His case has gripped Britain, emotions running high, with staff at Great Ormond Street even receiving death threats. And Charlie captured the attention of world leaders too. Along with Pope Francis in Rome, US President Donald Trump tweeted offers of help for the little boy. For some, anger at the final outcome. For most, sadness.
There can be no winners in this very sad case of Charlie Gard's short life. His parents, who wanted the best for him, are now clearly distraught. Great Ormond Street Hospital said that it was Charlie who was their patient and his interests that came before those of his parents.
A titanic struggle between medical expertise and parental love, with a baby at the centre. Richard Bestick, CGTN, the High Court, London.
That's an interesting and important discussion on Charlie's case. We are joined by Professor Fu Jun, who is a professor from National School of Development at Peking University. In Durham, we have Mr. Tom Brooks, award-winning author and dean of Durham Law School at the Durham University. Welcome, sir. In New York, we are joined by Mr. Liu Huawen, executive director of the Center of Human Rights Studies from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Welcome as well. I want to begin with you, Professor Brooks. Whose human rights are we talking about here when we are debating about this case?
Well, the center of the case is the best interest of this poor little boy, and we look to what those interests are and how they are best met. That has been the focus of the British courts looking at this case, and of course, to be fair, I think all persons involved, all had a stake and a view about what was best for this little boy in a very tragic case, in a very sad case.
The issue here, Professor Fu, is that this boy, very young, he could not make his own opinions known, and therefore the parents are making the decision for this boy and representing the boy to the others. But the question is whether the boy has been rightly and respectfully represented. I guess that is the very center of the argument here. What do you think?
Well, I think emotionally I'm with the parents, and legally I have to respect the court judgment. But the crux of the issue is that I see tensions between the principle of maximizing welfare, respecting individual choice, and finally how to promote virtue. And I guess the court probably has weighed the tension of the three and made the final decision. It's sad to see this case, but ultimately society has to come to a conclusion.
Mr. Liu, the thing here is not the easy life or death. It is more about what kind of life, what kind of death. Is it a life going to be of quality, or actually it's a life that is going to forever suffering and never be able to recover? But that has been quite an ethical issue that we have been debating, not just for this boy, but many people, in fact, whether they're adults or children who are suffering from diseases, particularly terminally ill diseases. So, Mr. Liu, what's your judgment here? What do you think is the most important priority according to you?
Yes, Tianwei, you are quite right that this kind of case is not a particular case, but from the a very sad story again, we could see more about this kind of difficult issue we have to consider. That is it's easy to say we should guarantee right to health, right to life of any individual, but due to the limits of the technical development, sometimes we have to respect the reality, respect the professional opinions. Just as the professor mentioned just now, the key issue is the best interest of the child. So they consider the same. The different parties consider the best interests of the child, but who decide last and what is really the best interest of the child is quite difficult to balance.
It is debatable on that issue, and therefore let's go to Professor Brooks. You are a professor of law, and therefore help us to understand, under those legal circumstances, how should we understand and interpret so-called the rights of the child and the welfare, the benefits of the child? Professor Brooks.
Yes, well, in reading the High Court's decision, in reading it on appeal to the Supreme Court, what the legal position is, it's a very settled one of looking at the best interest of the child from an independent standpoint. There are disputes between parents about what is best for a child, where each parent has a different view, which are incompatible, and a court must decide. In this case, there is a difference of opinion between the Great Ormond Street Hospital, which had Charlie Gard as its patient, and so in a position of care to determine what kind of care that child received, and of course Charlie's parents, who had a different view as to what should happen next. In looking at the best interest of the child test in this case, it was determined by law that there was no prospect of there being really any substantive or even minor help that any kind of treatment might give to the child. The child was had suffered irreversible brain damage, was left living solely by the use of a machine. There were concerns about what kind of life that was and what kind of discomfort that Charlie was suffering. And what's been called the experimental treatment in the United States has actually never once been tried on an animal for this condition, let alone any human being, with unknown effects for Charlie. And the doctor who would be administering this, who's been promoting this, said to the court that it was very unlikely that this would have any effect to help the child. And so these were the considerations that weighed in on this very sad case. But of course we all understand the parents trying to do everything they possibly can, which makes this case such a difficult one.
It is a difficult one. But we also have heard that there are different legislations, of course, in the different states of the United States, even just for one example. For example, the state of Kansas, for example, they has something called the assignments law, which is prohibiting the hospitals from withdrawing or taking away the life supporting system for any children under the age of 18 without the consent of the parents. That certainly seems to be quite a firm kinds of decision coming from the local legislation. But many wonder, is that kind of local legislation going to be helpful? Is the children's rights are absolutely going to be guaranteed as a result of this, or actually this is sacrificing the children's rights for the rights of the parents, whatever their decisions are? Professor Brooks, I want to go back to you before I go to the other guests.
Well, my view on that is I think that it should be largely left to medical professionals to give some steer on what should come next. To have a blanket operation that will treat all the same, irrespective of whether it will make any difference or provide any benefit, and indeed might prolong the suffering of those who are enduring the life-sustaining treatment in general. I think that that is a, I can see why lawmakers might ideologically make that view, but I think that they ought to be open-minded and flexible about the medical reasons that should weigh in on occasion on cases in general.
Well, Professor Fu, here in Beijing, the reason why people are paying so much attention to it, of course, we have this love for this child who, of course, has been suffering tremendously since the time he was born. But, it also has a lot to do with what about the other cases? Not just for this child, not just for Charlie, little Charlie, but also for many others at different age groups in different countries. Many people suffer from diseases and they are living on life support system in the hospital, and there's no quality of life as we all know it. And yet there is the very big dilemma, whether it's for the patient or for the relatives of the patients or for the hospital or for the welfare and medical system to make a decision. Professor Fu, what are some of the factors we really need to weigh here, and what is the ultimate respect and the rights of an individual that we're talking about here?
When we see different kind of judgment, one way to understand those judgments is sort of to do reverse engineering to the fundamental principles that we affirm.
What would that be?
One is to have individual choice. The other is how to distribute the welfare. So there is a tension between the limited resources and the individual desires that you have. So in spite of the emotional judgment that usually would see on the side of the parents, and those emotional judgments need to be balanced out with the professional judgment. In this particular case, it's the medical judgment about the quality of life and the validity of the technical equipments that we have to sustain life.
But Mr. Liu, as you may know, even for adults, when they are suffering to really an extreme degree and want to forget about the life supporting system, and they just want to, be able to go away from the earth or be able to, with dignity, shall we say. But that, of course, also has a lot of legal limits in various different countries, China included as well. So once again, I want to put the same question to you. What is the ultimate respect for an individual and for a human being? When one is making a decision about his or her own life, whether others' opinions really matter and to what degree, under what circumstances? Mr. Liu.
Yes, it's a kind of a sensitive, complicated issue. And from the current case, we found we are moved that so many people, they care the rights, the life of the little Charlie. It's understandable that all of us try to go all out, try our best efforts to help to save the little life. But reality is reality. Sometimes we have to behave reasonably. So the law and the society have to deal with difficulty issue in a balanced way. The key issue in this case, I think, is the right of the child. The child himself is the holder of the right. We should respect the best interests of the right holder. And the different parties, like the parents, the hospital, the courts, are the different actors to guarantee, to judge.
But Mr. Liu, what we are talking about is not Charlie's case alone, but rather many other individuals, adults included, when they are suffering from tremendous disease, they want to be able to make their own decision. But here is the very complicated decision-making process as well. It's not just their own, but rather involving a lot of other players. We wonder whether that is fair, to what degree, whether to others' opinions should matter, and to what extent. Mr. Liu, do you have an opinion?
Yes, I see. It depends. It depends on the different capacity of the rights holder. So for child, for adults, for the elderly, they have different capacity. So the patient, him or herself, and the person surrounding him or her should take the responsibility to judge, to evaluate in different case.
It really depends, according to you. What about to you, Professor Brooks, as we are running out of time? Professor Brooks, what are some of the factors, and whether one's own opinion about one's life, how, to what extent should be respected by the others? Whether others' opinion should matter about your own life?
Well, I think the opinions do matter, and indeed the parents in this case, their opinions mattered. They were they disagreed with the hospital. They wanted to challenge it. They all looked to see was there any type of treatment anywhere that might be able to provide some type of benefit.
That is for this case, but what about for adults?
To help their little boy.
We all understand that. We talked about that already.
For adults, yeah, okay. Well, I think for adults it'd be the same type of situation. If adults were unable to give expression to their interests, then it would be the same type of case. If they were able to give expression to their interests, then I think it would also play out similarly. You know, it's not just the individual that has a say, others have a say as well. They should all be considered. Of course, if I was a patient and I had expressed a view in a living will about how I should be treated by a life support machine, I think that's something that is widely recognized by many jurisdictions as having some very serious weight.
Right.
When it comes to parents and children in general, parents have a strong weight on that, and that's generally recognized both in this particular case and widely. So it's a balance between competing interests, not one or the other.
A lot of food for thoughts for this discussion. I'm sure that debate will continue as we're going to have many other controversial cases related to this specific issue. Thank you so much, the three of you gentlemen, for being with us. Tom Brooks, Liu Hua Wen, and Fu Jun. Really appreciate it. Thank you. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight with Tian Wei, CGTN, in your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again tomorrow for insights across China and around the world. Good night.